So what's our motivation for looking at the DC? Well, there's places where it's difficult. So let's suppose we have large areas, 100 kilometers on the side. Here's the case we just talked about. We've got a resistor. Sometimes you just have rugged terrain, hard to inject currents. AC resistivity definitely has its place, but it's not a panacea. Break this apart. Again, my philosophy here is always, let's do the simplest possible thing that we can do, building block. Try and kind of do it all at once. And I think it's kind of carry through this simple framework. So first of all, I'm just going to outline the basics of the EM experiment. So I have a transmitter and receiver. It could be on the ground or we could be towing them. Case where we've got a helicopter that's towing a bird. There's a transmitter in here which is putting out a primary magnetic field. And that time-varying field put out by the transmitter generates electric fields everywhere, and in particular currents in any place where there's a conductor. And then give rise to their own magnetic fields, and they can be measured at that's basically it. A transmitter puts out a time-varying magnetic field that generates currents in conductors, produce magnetic fields that can be. So let's look at a couple of things associated with it. First of all, there's the transmitter. A square wave pulse like that, or it could be. That's what's going to go out through here. We need to look at our equations again and try to decide, okay, what things are going to be important. In our initial Maxwell's equation, except for one term here, which was the electric displacement term. Important for ground penetrance. But for what we want to do, we'll ignore that, and then you'll often hear the word quasi-static. Basically, that's what. So let's look first at Ampere's law. You have a current density, then that's going to give rise to a magnetic field. This operator here is called the curl operator. And really what it means is that things are kind of circulating. You know that wherever, grade school, if you in a wire, direction of that current, the way that your fingers tells you the direction of the magnetic field. So the magnetic field curls, and the expression for the magnetic field is given by this, with pencil I, and then R. Wire in on itself to make a coil, then the magnetic field sort of looks like this. It looks like that. And there's a few things that are important. The strength of the magnetic field. Look just like a little bar magnet, toy magnets that you used to play with. So that has a magnetic field. So in this case, the strength of the magnetic the moment, and it's equal to the product of the current times the area relationship. The other thing that's important is falls off as 1 over r cubed. And all this does here is sort of tell you you're pointing at different places and sort of. Faraday's law, that the time rate of change of the magnetic flux into an electric field. So if I take a magnetic field and I change it as a function of time, then I'm going to generate an electric field, but that electric field also has a curl to it. Aspect here, there's a minus sign here. Lens, so this is often known as lens as well. And then there's another thing that is important. The time varying magnetic field generated everywhere. Okay? Equations that have an electric field and I get a current. Okay? That's Ohm's law. So suppose I've got a magnet, I got a bar magnet here. Then circuit, it's going to have a coil. I can measure the voltage in that circuit. And what I'm going to do is to induce a current in this circuit. And I'm going to do that by moving this magnet. So in the initial state, here. So I got magnetic field lines that are going like this, right? Or it is called the magnetic flux. It's the integral over the area of the normal component of B as a process. So it's given by this. Inside this loop, I mean, it's a circuit. There's going a voltage or an EMF that's induced, governed by this equation. Voltage is minus d5 state. There is flux, but nothing is changing. That is equal to 0, so there's no current that's going to be flowing. Take this magnet, so if I push it in, then there's going to be stronger magnetic fields. So there's going to be flux that's increasing. That sign means that the voltage is actually going to be less, so that the current is going to be flowing in one direction but there's still going to be a current flowing, so the light bulb goes up. Anyway, I pull it back. Now my flux is decreasing. Voltage is, it's positive. So now the current's going the other way around the circuit, going through the light bulb. That's basically it, right? So if you're a conductor, push this magnetic field. Now you get this electric field that's going in you. So that electric field is going to be, magnetic flux is increasing. You get this electric field that's going in, circular. You're going to get currents inside you so long as you're conducting. And if I pull this out, then the currents are going to go the other way, right? Apps to show how all this works. There's both an app for the harmonic and then one for the transient. Is that it's basically, they're called two coil apps, right? Coil here, in which there's current in the piece as primary. And this changes, if the primary current changes, that means the flux inside this inner coil, there's going to be a current that's going to be. So there's two apps, one for the harmonic, it's going to look like this, and one for that. So here's my coil, my primary coil, and I got a current that's initially constant. I turned it off, and then nothing. The magnetic flux looks exactly the same. But if I look at the time magnetic flux, right here, there's a huge spike. It's actually a delta function. So I get a very large spike, an initial current, and then that current is going to decay. So that's what happens here. I've got a magnetic field that's coming in. I initially get a current, my secondary current, and it decays. The rate at which this decays is governed by this equation here. So it's an exponential decay upon tau. Tau is a time constant, and it's equal to L upon R. So our circuit has got a resistance in it, and then the coil has got a certain amount of self-inductance. So that's our. So in the time domain, things are pretty simple, right? Push it in. Suddenly, there's no flux there. You get instantly current in you, and then just decays away. So if we look at what's called the response function, that's just e to t upon tau. Depending upon tau, differently. So if I've got a very large tau that plotted versus time versus response function linear, then that comes out linear. Or if I plotted on a linear, it would just be this. Okay. So time domain. What happens if we have in a frequency domain? Now we've got something that looks like this. So there's never an off time. It's on, then you shut it off, right? In frequency domain, it's always on. That's a bit of a complication. If we look at what let's say the primary current is here. It looks like this. Then there's going to be a current that's going to be generated in this target loop because the flux is always changing. There is going to be this guy. The secondary current in that loop has to be at the same frequency. There's no possibility it could be a different frequency. That means that the only thing that can happen is that there's an amplitude of this green curve, secondary. And maybe there's a phase shift. Let's say the red and the green. That's it. That's all that can happen. So that the secondary current has got to be given by this. It's got some amplitude, and it's got same frequency, but it might be phase shifted. And I'll close it into two parts. A part that's in phase with it. So if you imagine primary field is going like that, then there could be something else that's going in phase with it, right? But there could also be another part that's kind of out of phase. The primary is going like this, right? And the other part's kind of going out of phase. So that's this. So I could take this guy and add them up and get that. Mathematically, it's just a trigonometric representation. And I could expand this to have something that looks like a cosine, and something that looks like a sine. So whatever this here, I say, oh, well, that's the in phase part. Or sometimes I call it the real part. Now, a sine, so that's the out of phase, or sometimes it's called the quadrature, sometimes it's called the imaginary. These words here, this is a confusion between EM people trying to talk to seismologists or elsewhere, right? Because they're kind of non-intuitive, and they all mean the same thing. So sometimes people talk about in phase or real, out of phase, quadrature, imaginary. That's just how they work. But you realize, first of all, these words all mean the same thing. They're really trivial. They're really simple, especially if you remember this diagram. Because here's the primary, here's the secondary. I just got to take the secondary and divide it up into two parts so you can amplitude. Okay? And there's this phase lag. It's got an expression that's given by this. This quantity is the induction number. Omega L upon R. And whatever combination of these guys gives the same number, we're going to have the same phase lag. Okay, so that's the induction. We could look to see, for various induction numbers, how this quantity and this quantity changes. So I can change the induction number by a whole bunch of ways, but I can think about it particularly by increasing frequency. So here's a plot of induction number on this axis, and the response function. What we see is that the in phase part looks like this. It's black line. And the quadrature part, the out of phase part, as the induction number increases, this is between this term and this term. This picture is iconic. Every EM book that you look at, and it's the response function for a harmonic system. What's our summary? If we have a step-off current or a harmonic current, things are kind of the same. They're governed by the same equations, and what the currents in the for both systems. Look at Ampere's law. So Ampere's law, it says if there's a current, then it must be a magnetic field. So now we've got currents induced in here. That's going to give us magnetic fields, which we can measure accuracy. So I'm going to receive it. What do we do with that? What field? magnetometer. Magnetometer would measure the B field. So generally these are flux gauge magnetometers, and we'd have maybe a 3-component. We could also have a coil really measures, and its output is a voltage. And then if you wanted components of the field, you'd have to have coils in different. Coupling is a big issue, and I want to explain it in the following sentence. Suppose we've got a transmitter sitting like this. Let's think about this as our target. So we're going to think about our target as being a loop. If the loop is oriented like this, you can see all the magnetic flux from here is coming straight down through. So we're perfectly coupled. Remember, flux was the integral of B dot the normal. So everything is coming right through here. So if we're sitting out here, where the lines of flux are coming like that, this also is coupling. However, if we come up here, where we are parallel to the base of that coil, there's no flux. It's cutting. So there's no time rate of change of flux going through here, so there's nothing that's going to be recorded. But coupling is going to work in 2 cases. One, if this is your transmitter and that's your target. But the other is that you could imagine this being the currents in the target and having to couple with the receiver. So there's coupling both between the transmitter and target, and there's other coupling between your target. So now we're kind of set to put all this together. Here's kind of what's really happening. We've got a transmitter, we've got a conductor, we've got a receiver. And, well, first of all, we're going to translate these into coils. So our transmitter has got a particular loop there. Here's our body. It's got a represented by coil, and then here's our receiver measured by coil. If you look in a lot of textbooks,
I'm confusing something here. Here you are transmitting a magnetic field and measuring in the magnetometer you don't have any emission of it. You only receive the magnetic cover, or no?
If we're measuring with the magnetometer, we're just measuring B. I'm thinking here that we're going to represent everything with coils, so we're going to measure dB, dt, so we'll measure a voltage. This is what's done for surveys. So let's just think about like a voltage in a coil, which is the same as dB, dt. So if we're going to measure the response, so we want to measure the ratio of the secondary magnetic field to the primary magnetic field. Then the expression for doing that looks like this. So when you first look at it, you think, wow, that looks kind of complicated. We can now understand exactly how all of these terms come about because of the following. First of all, we've got to get the energy from our transmitter to the receiver, and that's involved. And we're going to call that coupling M12, and it's given an expression that looks like this. It's purely just geometry. That tells us how the couples with that. And then now we've got to get the energy from here to here, so that tells us how this loop couples with that. So that's M23. There's a primary signal that's coming from here, and the coupling there is M1. Now if we're looking at the ratio of the secondary to the primary field, we can see, okay, secondary field, oh, it's got the energy here, so there's a coupling M12, M23, okay, over the primary, that's just M13. So now we see this term, this stuff out here, as just a coupling. But then what we haven't thought about is the response of this target, response function, and that's what this guy is. So alpha is the induction number. So this quantity here is essentially this curve. So that kind of makes everything, so we now have a way of going from, here's our physical system, here's our loop system, for the loop system. It kind of tells us what we should be measuring in terms of coupling and induction. One of the things that you'll see very often is, what a system like this, often it's called a loop system, or sometimes it's called a sling ramp system. So that, if I'm taking this over, so there's Christian. So let's suppose Christian is he's our target conductor. Okay? And now I'm going to take a loop system over here, and I'm going to come along and record the signal. And the question is, okay, what's that signal going to look like? So here's what that signal looks like. It looks like this. I explain what happens. So if here's my transmitter, so now I've got a magnetic field that's looking like this. So here's my primary. Okay. Magnetic field comes in like this, and now this is going to respond. There's going to be a current that's going to be set up in here to oppose that change. A current in here that's in that direction to oppose, that's where lenses lock in. And so that magnetic field is going to be flux coming in here. I got a current that's set up in here. It's going to generate a magnetic field like this. Primary field up here, from here, is in this same direction. So a secondary field are in the same direction. So we're going to say, I'm going to plot it as positive. So when both the transmitter and receiver are on this one side of the loop, I'm going to get some positive number. Go. The next thing that happens is that as this moves over at some point, across it. And the question is why? What's going to happen? Why is this crossing zero? Yep. I have no coupling with my receiver, right? So if my receiver is sitting right over here, magnetic field, there's no coupling. And now when I'm sitting like this, so the transmitter is on one side and the receiver on the other, magnetic field from here is pointing down, the primary field is pointing up, so it's a negative. And then now I've got another zero crossing. What happens? What's the cause of that zero crossing?
The same thing.
It's null coupling, but it's a different reason. If my transmitter is sitting right over here, now there's no flux that's coming through that coil, so now there's no currents in the coil. But I was null coupled with the receiver. Now there's no currents. And when I get both on here, They're on the same center. So it's a simple diagram to look at, but there's a lot of stuff that's going on, because as long as I'm on this side of Christian, currents that are going to be flowing in through him, and depending upon where the receiver is, might actually be a null value. And then as long as I'm on this side, currents are still going the same way as you. The other polarity for the field, which is going the other way around. So it's negative, and then back to positive. That's the characteristic curve. That's all geometry. So what about this relationship between the real and the imaginary parts? So it's in black, and the red is the imaginary. We have an induction number of 1. Number of 1. The real and the imaginary part are equal. So that means that black lines are simply overlapping. Okay? So now we understand everything about this scenario for an induction number equal to 1. What happens if I change the induction number? So let's suppose I made it less than 1. Let's suppose I made it 0.5. What is going to happen to these curves? The shape will change, the red and the black are going to change. I'm going to change that induction number. You go? No, not in. Your name?
So then,
Any answer. What's going to happen?
it's going to change.
What's going to happen?
To be like a amplitude difference on this curve. Like they'll be in phase, but not the. Yeah.
Right. So if we change the induction number to 0.5, then I'm saying, okay, now I'm up here. So now notice that the red, the out phase part, is larger than the black. So it stays the same, okay, because that was all geometry. But the relative amplitudes change. Okay. If I made it to 2, now you notice that the real part is much larger than 2. Okay? So there's actually a lot of really important stuff that just went on in there. So we've got the for frequency domain system. And here we can understand what a particular curve is going to be like. It shows it real magic. Yeah.
I understand the equation of induction number, but I find it hard to understand it intuitively, like in the Earth. How does it relate to conductivity? Larger induction number, lower induction number.
The resistance is of the circuit goes back to the resistivity. The induction number for the Earth will depend upon divided by rho or omega times sigma. So if I change the conductivity, if I increase the conductivity or increase the frequency, both of those will increase the induction number, and you'll have a curve that's similar to that. Okay, so what about, well, it can't matter, right? I'm sitting over here, so we did put in a frequency domain experiment. So Christian had some currents in. But if I simply did the following, I just truncated my the primary. The eddy currents that are going to be set up in you exactly the same as they domain. So we wouldn't expect there's any difference. So the shape of the curve, so it doesn't matter whether I'm in frequency or time, the shape is the same. The only difference is that our amplitude as a function of time, it's just going to decay. So what have we actually learned at this point? Well, we've got some of the basics of EM induction. We now understand the response functions, time and frequency. Mutual coupling is really important. Some idea about data for. So we got this circuit model. It looks great. Is it actually applicable for geologic targets? So we check. So we're going to now take, so this is one that's getting closer to an airborne system. So here's the Earth. Got transmitters 20 meters above. I got a receiver that's offset a few meters, 8 meters. And here's response from my circuit model. Looks something like that. I take this same system and model it numerically. Conducting sphere here. Transmitter right on top, receiver offset, and I compute those numerical results. You see, I get something that's got the same complete characteristics. So here's the real, here's the imaginary, here's the means that circuit model is actually a pretty reasonable model. We have provided, or as part of the open source resources that we have, code. This is primarily responsive Lindsay and other people at UBC, and it works in a two-dimensional cylindrical system, so it can model anything with symmetry. And you can see back in here, because if we had a transmitter sitting vertically above a sphere, then everything is circularly symmetric. Is available. There's two associated papers, one by Crockett et al. And one by Heggie et al. And this is a really great code, and it's big, and it's very versatile, and really allows a lot of different computations. And importantly, allows you to kind of see what the fields are. For those of you who are in the oil industry, one of the big things that the SEG, this last year, use of steel casings as extended to pump current down into the earth. So if you're doing recovery of oil in a field, you're trying to figure out what might be electrode that can help. For a vertical pipe, even if you've got really thin casings and it's permeable, this code can model that, so you can kind of see what's happening. Anyway, that's freely available. Excuse me. So we're doing not too badly. Apps for the frequency and time domain. It hasn't yet been talked about. We've got to get energy from our transmitter to our target, and also back from the target to the receiver. So that's an important aspect. We need to take account of that. So this raises the question, okay, so how do the EM fields and fluxes behave in a conductive? Let's go back and take a look at our equations. So our first order equations look like this. So we can actually combine them into a second order equation. This. So it's got three terms in here. The first part is a diffusion term. That's kind of what we've been thinking about at this point. The other part is a wave propagation term. So this is where the GPR. Take the Fourier transform of that, we can write this equation, which is a vector Helmholtz equation. Excuse me. Just a bit dry. So this is a vector Helmholtz equation. This thing here is, oh, excuse me. This is our wave number, and it's got these two terms in it. Not sure what happened. Got something here. And Lindsay was when we GeoSci.xyz at last. Okay. Let's rewind here. Sorry about that. Combine everything into this second order term. And then we end up with something that looks like this. So this is what's called a vector Helmholtz equation. And K is the wave number. So it's got these two terms. Make this term small, which it generally is. Then we can just get that K is given by this expression here. Yeah, so it's K then becomes complex. If we put all that into a plane wave solution, by a plane wave, so in a plane wave, that's just kind of moving kind of vertically down. So anywhere in the X or Y directions, everything looks the same. And for an electromagnetic signal, we could think of a plane wave as just being like a sheet of current. Let's suppose we just had a whole bunch of current that was just going on the ceiling into an out. And then the magnetic field from that, you could get from orientation of your fingers. So the magnetic field would be like this. So the electric field is like that. And then it's all kind of propagating vertically down. And it here as a sheet current. This way, here's the electric field, here's the magnetic field, and everything is propagating like this. So that's a plane wave. And with that approximation, we can put this wave number in, and we get the representation of that plane wave looking like this. So it's got, this is the phase part, so that's telling how things are propagating into the Earth. But the important part is this attenuation term here. It's got an e to the minus alpha z. The amplitude of this wave as it goes into the Earth, it would have this kind of an exponential decay. See that in the background, where there's an important point here at which the wave has decayed to a value of 1 upon e of its amplitude at the surface, so about 1/3. Is called the skin depth. That's a very important term for electromagnetics, and it's given by this particular formula. So that's skin depth. It tells you, so skin depth is really the depth that a plane wave travels before it decays to 1 upon e. It's inversely proportional to sigma, conductivity, shorter the skin depth. The higher the frequency, so if I've got that at this point can only see Christian, make the frequency lower or something, I could maybe get back to Alini back there or maybe even farther back, right? So everything kind of depends upon depth and that product of the conductivity and the frequency. Okay, so what happens? That was the frequency. What happens in the time domain? Okay, so in the our basic equations in the time domain are given by this. And if we're trying to think about what would happen, suppose we did the following. Suppose there's a source here, and I turn off the current. So instantly, there's a time rate of change of magnetic flux, and this magnetic field is going to propagate into the Earth. So as a function of time, a linear as an example. As a function of time, I turn this current off, and then there'll be a short time later, this magnetic field that's coming in. Now, that magnetic field is going to increase rapidly to hit a point, and then it's just going to decrease. Procedure is that something happens here. There's a pulse. It's going to kind of propagate in. You're going to feel nothing. You'll have a maximum, and then it's going to decrease. Here's the difference between electromagnetic diffusion and the seismic wave. Because in the seismic wave, that happens until a particular time, a one-way travel time, pulse, and then nothing happens. So it's really well defined in time. In electromagnetics, the whole process diffusing in. So there's nothing, then it kind of rises, and then it trails off for a long time after that. So instead of having a sharp pulse. So for those of you who are working in seismic, you could look at that and you'd realize immediately, like, okay, wait a minute, I'm simply not going to get the resolution. Yeah. The other way of looking at it is time after I've turned my transmitter off and I got this pulse that's going in. I can take a picture of the room. So now the magnetic field, so this is now depth, so starting here to the end of the room. And if at a particular time I took a picture, I'd see, oh, there's a maximum at some depth up here, and then it goes back to. So that's kind of what my pulse would look like at a particular time in Europe. And there's a peak here that is called the diffusion distance. This peak is given by this formula here. Use that time to kind of, or that distance, to give us an idea about how deep or how far that electromagnetic energy has traveled at a particular time. So this depth here, which in this case is about 60 meters, says that, okay, at whatever time I chose to take that snapshot, the energy has kind of around 60 meters. We've got the diffusion distance. We have the skip area. Those are two sort of general quantities that kind of give you an idea about where the electromagnetic energy propagating at a particular time or how far it can go. Again, throughout the day. For the plane waves, one for transient and one for harmonic plane waves. Just give you an idea of what the waves look like as they're propagating in, and yeah, you're going to currents, fields, and all that. So now we're set to kind of add put all this stuff together and really look at the effects of the background conductivity. So here's what we have. Just going to put energy into the ground through the target. Once it gets into the target, then we have the stuff that we did previously, like, okay, it's going to induce currents in there, and those, it's going to get fields kind of out here. But now those fields have to travel back. We're going to get attenuated. So, and see if we can intuitively figure out what's going on. So we're going to look first at time domain. So we've got a transmitter. It's going to be circular. It's got a current that's going around, and then we're shutting it off. Turn this guy off, and we're going to look at what the currents and fields are on this conductive sphere here at a time of 10 to the minus 5 seconds. So when the background resistivity or conductivity is 10 to the minus 8 Siemens per meter, so that's about air. If we look at the currents on the sphere, they look like that. Okay, so let's just think about that for a second. So we've got a transmitter. We're going to induce currents, and the currents are going to look like that. So maybe my first question, there's a transmitter here, and think about waves coming down. First of all, why don't we have currents inside the sphere? Currents. The currents seem to be kind of confined to this region.
They propagate from out to inside, so maybe in the later times.
Okay, good. Anybody else?
Conductivity contrast between the two, so the current would stay within the boundary of the contrast.
So do you think the currents should just be at the contrast, or would they ever get inside?
When the excitation hits like this, excite the excited and the current.
Okay.
Is within the boundary. That's
Good. Anybody else? Sorry?
Magnetic flow inside the sphere is zero. So we don't have any necessary inside. It's a completely conductive sphere, right?
It's per meter. It's not an infinite conductor.
So I mean, the VDT inside the sphere, zero in this case.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, so there's a lot of right things that were said. So first of all, currents are confined to kind of a uniform region. There can't be any currents in here because there's no conductivity, so it can only be here. Next important thing, which Alini said, is that we're at 10 to the minus 5 seconds. So at 10 to the minus 5 seconds, if you looked at diffusion distance, there was only, there's just a certain distance that stuff could have diffused in, and that is what that's what
snapshot, right? Snapshot in 10 to the minus 5. So
Yeah. So if we went back
with time, it will move, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So went to a later time,
Yeah.
we find currents that are going in. Perfect. So that's great. So now let's look at the effects of the background. So here the background is basically free space. And now I'm going to change it. I'm going to make it much more productive. I'm going to make it 10 to the minus 2 Siemens per meter. Now what will we do? Anybody? Julie? Talked about, okay, we've got to get energy